ready to make podcast history. And in answer to that question, this is Dan.
And this is Ron.
And this is Elizabeth.
She sounds a little bit like she's hesitant about making podcast history, but don't worry, it doesn't hurt that much the first time.
I just can't believe that I'm actually here.
Yeah, this isn't just any Elizabeth. This is Elizabeth, the inimitable Elizabeth the Podguest, or Elizabeth the inimitable. I can't say
inimitable Podguest.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and today marks the day that I transitioned from being pod adjacent to podguest.
Woohoo!
Yeah, and I found out the politically correct term is Podvisitor for people that were dropped off in a pod, like Elizabeth. That's why they called them visitors in those, in those movies.
Yeah.
Close Encounters. Well, did they call them visitors in Close? No, they would call them visitors in Close Encounters.
I don't remember. What are they called in Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Because they come out of pods, right? They're snatchers. They're body snatchers.
Yeah.
That was their name. Yeah. Well, that's what the movie's called. Did they call the creatures anything, or was there enough knowledge that it was going on?
Those are all good questions. Actually, I found I found Day the Earth Stood Still. I didn't find Invasion. We should do that one for the podcast because I don't think I haven't seen that in forever. If I ever saw the whole thing.
Oh, that's a great movie.
Yeah.
And we can see both versions.
Yeah, we could. Well, Day the Earth Stood Still. I have the version with both versions. I have the DVD with the both.
Are you serious?
Both versions, yeah.
Wow,
it's got the Keanu Reeves one, it's got the 50s one.
I didn't know such a thing existed.
Yeah, well, public domain, they'll just toss anything on as like I had a DVD once of, did you ever see that version of Othello with Josh Hartnett? And it was called O, and they're like on a high school basketball team.
Oh, wow, no.
That they like try to do. It's
sounds
okay. It sounds really fake, right? But that was when like teen movie Shakespeare adaptations were all the rage. Right, because like there was 10 Things I Hate About You. That was an adaptation of 12th Night, I think. And then there were a couple of anyway. But yeah, it had the entire silent version of Othello as a bonus feature on that disc because they didn't have to pay for it, so why not?
Oh, that's fair. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so today we watched a movie. We watched a movie that I have not seen since I was in college. And that I believe Ron and our special visitor have never seen.
That is not true. I saw half of this movie previously, so I finally got the chance to finish it, which felt very, I felt like I had this like
Did this movie have a name?
Undetermined sense that I've been lacking closure for quite a while, and now I finally figured out why.
I don't think the movie had a name though.
No.
This was an unnamed film.
It was a nameless movie.
Nameless movie, okay.
But it has a nickname, right?
Yeah.
And a director.
Right. The nickname is Goofy Foot.
Goofy Foot?
That's what its friends call it. We watched The Devil Probably by Robert Bresson, his second to last film before L'Argent, in English, The Dollar or Money.
Until he made The Fifth Element.
Until he made The Fifth Element, as Ron informed me.
Yeah, he dropped the R
3 years after he died, I think.
Okay, that sounds about right.
Like that.
Well, when he died, he dropped the R.
No, I think he was alive for the fifth.
Crazy.
No, because he died in like 1998. Because he was. That's like one of the weirdest things about this movie is that it's about like people that are in their very early 20s, but it's directed by a guy who's in his like mid to late 70s.
Huh. So he really doesn't understand the people in their 20s. No.
I don't know. Maybe that's
perfectly. And that's not what it's about necessarily. It's not age per se.
Yeah, it's just funny to me that he never chose to really focus on older people ever.
Huh. Yeah,
throughout his career. Yeah, it's always focused on like teenagers, except for the one movie about a donkey, in which case the donkey kind of goes through the whole donkey life cycle.
Okay.
Well, I do think that age plays an important role in this movie, just because the main characters are all like in their early 20s, and they're like most of them are activists. And well, we'd have to really dive into the plot here, but my point was,
if you want to,
right?
Yeah, we should do that at some point.
That's why we brought you here. We should do
that. That's true. So, I mean, basically they're activists. A lot of them are environmental activists who are educating themselves about like a lot of the environmental horrors that are happening around the world that haven't really gotten that much attention. And the kind of age dynamic that's set up throughout the film is that like the only people who seem to be recognizing that there are like serious issues of like environmental pollution and corruption and whatnot in the movie are the young people, and all of the older people they keep encountering are just kind of conveniently oblivious to or in denial of those realities. I can't really think of...
Well, like they have the instructor. They do go to class once in a while.
That's true. They go to class, which I think it was just one class.
It was one class we see a scene from that same class a few times. Or maybe it was twice, because it shows up again later on. But it might be the same.
Right.
I think it's the same instructor, the same topic.
Right.
Talking about radiation.
I'm good.
I'm good, thank you. So yeah, but it just, I think the school is just the one instructor. I remember a second time showing up, because I remember thinking like, oh, yeah, what were they talking about last time? So.
Right.
Yeah. But, and they're challenging him, because he's talking about radiation, but he's talking about the safety. And even when there was some radiation in a container, there was a derailment, but he's like, yeah, it's cool. And they're like, no, that's not cool. And he's like, yeah, it was cool. Nobody got hurt.
Right.
Like, yeah, but somebody could get hurt. And
there's kind of this like assumption that the powers that be are naturally like making this as safe as possible, and there's nothing to worry about.
This is like a film about the tension that should exist around most of these subjects.
Right.
Like if we were dealing with them as a population in a much more kind of sober, direct fashion. Or acknowledging them, I guess, is maybe more than dealing with them.
Well, I think it illustrated the tension between those two groups of people really clearly in a way that I haven't really seen a lot of other films do. Like, just in that direct way. Like, he has a very direct way of people just kind of state things very simply in this movie in a way that people don't really in normal life.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, Bresson's style is... Nobody else really makes movies like he does. There's one guy who's like around now who takes a lot from Bresson, named Bruno Dumont, but
Bruno. Yeah,
you just like you don't get yeah, he's just got this very weird theory of what movies are. He believes that they're the cinema is half painting, half music. As opposed to, like, I think most theories of cinema, which is cinema is a combination of, like, recreated environments in theater.
Recreated environments in theater. What does that mean?
So, like, sets that are supposed to be more convincing than something you'd see in a theatrical performance, but the overall content and structure is supposed to mimic the theater insofar as, you have performers saying things. You have a story that's structured usually around a 3 or 5 acts, rising, falling kind of thing.
I could definitely see that, just because... A lot, I mean, and you mentioned this at one point while we were watching it, Dan. A lot of the sound in the film is kind of reduced down to the most essential noises. So the kind of effect is like it's a very quiet movie, and a lot of the times you're just listening to people's footsteps.
Oh, yeah, and he doesn't use music, like, ever, unless it's in the background somewhere. And even then, it's, like, incredibly specifically... It's very intentional.
There was an organ playing, and so they were talking, and then suddenly you'd hear a few sounds like bam, 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 and then they were talking some more, and there might be an answer to something, and bam,
bam, in the beginning, bam.
Right.
It's almost like he was making fun of that tendency.
Yeah. It was really
like, it seems so stupid. Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think when I first found Bresson, I was kind of like going through my phase where I was studying John Cassavetes really intensely, and I was... For like a couple years, music in movies bothered me. Like if it wasn't particularly thoughtfully put there, like if it was just sort of the person was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to throw a song in here because nobody was talking for 2 seconds and I got nervous, right? Like that's most popular movies. Like
I can really appreciate a soundtrack that's like really beautiful and like really enhances the experience. Like for example, 1917. I mean that soundtrack was absolutely like gorgeous. And...
A Clockwork Orange.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I feel like soundtrack, they have a tendency to kind of flatten the action because there's like a certain inherent ambiguity to an image by itself. And I think that's sort of what Bresson takes advantage of a lot. But you start to lose that, the more you kind of signify what the emotional response to the thing is supposed to be, the less ambiguity there is and the less interesting the image becomes. For me, at least, and I think Bresson definitely was working off of. Bresson doesn't want to underline anything, right? Like that's the weird thing about his movies is that everybody seems to be speaking so directly, but then you try to make like some kind of coherent statement of like this is what this movie was about afterwards, and it's very hard to do.
No, except for there's one thing that we learn about from the beginning, and we know how it's going to end, and that's the only coherent bit of it. In fact, I got completely lost. We should probably talk about what the movie was actually about and whatever sort of almost not quite plot. But,
we touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the backdrop, we kind of touched on the backdrop, but the main characters are basically, there's a guy named Charles who's this sort of lanky, long-haired kid who always wears the same outfit. And then he has...
Well, let's just say literally the opening 30 seconds is a newspaper
clipping.
And there's a picture of him and it says, guy commits suicide, and then there's another newspaper that says, guy murdered. Okay, and then the movie begins.
Right.
Okay, now go back to what you were saying.
Right, so you see that, and then, so you're kind of thrown into this world of political activism, and this young man and his friends are deeply involved in it, but you kind of, right off the bat, get the sense that he's become cynical about all of it and doesn't really see a point to the sort of action that they're trying to take. And so kind of like right off the bat, I feel like, we're starting to get a sense like this guy is really like detached from having a whole lot of like emotional connections to the people in the world around him.
And everything there's some I hope I'm not taking too far away from your point, but every time that there's something positive in these relationships, there's a lot of these statements that are just like somebody says something in return. And each one of those works independently. I was having a really hard time connecting everything. I got lost between who was who, but I could understand these couplets. And every time somebody said something positive, there'd be a negative response to it. And when somebody said something negative, there'd be a positive response. So it'd be something like, she really loves you. She'd be and the response is she'd be upset if I stayed with her. I'm totally, I don't know if that exact coupling was made, but that's the kind of stuff that.
Right. Well, it was. Yeah. No, I think you're onto something really interesting there because you kind of got the sense even though these people are interacting a lot and there's all sorts of confusing love triangles going on, like people are like having multiple relationships and. You don't really get a sense that they're really, like, connecting to each other.
Well, it kind of reminded me of Mark Rappaport that way, right? You have, like, this operatic, grandiose, like...
performative...
insane plot that's, like, is complicated. I mean, I feel like the plot in this really wasn't that complicated, but by Bresson standards, it was incredibly complicated. He doesn't really deal with love triangle-y stuff very often, and you could probably tell that from how he's not really a filmmaker about human passions.
No.
Or concerned about human passions that much.
Well, everybody's... Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, everybody, just in terms of passion, everybody speaks in this affectless... They speak without any affect. And they might say things that actually have some, even something that'd be kind of meaningful. They talk about love, and they talk about death, and whatever else. But they all say it in sort of this almost monotone. Well, not monotone, but without any affect, without any... You couldn't tell by listening to them how they really felt. It's just the words.
Yeah, and that's like that's the hallmark of... Because most of the actors, that when we're seeing them in this movie, or you're seeing them in any other Bresson movie, except maybe the first two when he was really young... you're probably watching the 32nd or 33rd consecutive take they did.
No way.
Because he hated acting. Like, Alfred Hitchcock hated actors. Robert Bresson hated acting. And so he would Everybody in this movie, this is probably the only movie they were in, because he didn't like the idea of the audience recognizing and then kind of tying the film into the outside world.
Huh, okay.
So you have a lot of people where probably most of those people were not professional actors in any capacity. This was probably the only acting thing that most of them did ever. The other thing is that, yeah, he would just kind of grind down the performance until you have, when somebody's voice fluctuates at all, you become abnormally sensitized to it in his films by the end of it, I feel like you're kind of picking up the emotional cues within the line readings, in a way where, like, if you were doing it with, I don't know, like any popular movie that's come out in the last 20 years, you'd just be getting, like, readings off the charts. Right. He's not... The actors aren't giving you the emotions that you're supposed to be interpreting. And something I just speaking of the whole passions element, it was interesting because as much as the movie was dominated by these overlapping sort of complex, sexual relationships, we never actually witnessed any genuine, like, attraction or passion between any of the characters. Like, I can't think of a single scene where they were even, like, showing affection toward each other.
You love me, so I should leave you.
Right. 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 And I think that's... yeah.
I love you, so you should leave me.
Right.
I don't like you, so stay with me.
That's something I love about his movies, is that you have anything that could rise in interest that's not particularly deep or thoughtful is just avoided or deflated immediately, so the film kind of lives and dies on whether what he's saying is interesting in the slightest.
Uh-huh.
Right.
In a way that, say, I don't know, like I'm going to say a Michael Bay movie. There's probably more subtle examples, but like a Michael Bay movie, everything's underlined 3 times in case you don't understand it.
Uh-huh.
Everything is about, like, are you entertained right now? And Bresson has this...
he doesn't care about anybody being entertained.
He has this profound lack of faith in the value of entertainment generally that I find very fascinating.
Huh. It definitely comes through.
Yeah, it came through very well in this. So, Elizabeth, you're synopsizing the movie as well as it can be synopsized.
Oh, I was?
So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. What was I saying?
I don't remember. Yeah, it's so hard to... Well, maybe it's easy to synopsize. It's hard to give a coherent plot.
Right.
But, maybe you said everything. They talk about, there's the environmental part, there's the little bit of the older people, like the instructor, or when they're on the bus and suddenly the people on the bus have a conversation in response to what the one of our protagonists was saying, and they're all older.
Right. That was really interesting. Yeah. I mean... There's a lot of different elements. I mean, yeah, we can talk about that, like...
But then the guy ends up at their main guy, Charles. He goes to a therapist for some reason. Oh, he finds a gun. He goes and hangs out with some folks at a campfire by the water.
Yeah, there's a guy playing. That's one of the only times in the movie that music actually happens, and it's this beautiful guitar music that's just kind of... There's a performer, and they're all listening to him. And, yeah, Charles happens to sit next to this guy who has a gun in his bag. And the guy tells him, I'll sell it to you, but Charles ends up just stealing it and walking off.
He pulls out a bullet, holds it in his hand, and then he shoots the water for a few times. Well, we hear the shot off screen.
Right.
And the guy whose gun it is goes over, and it's Charles shooting into the river.
Right.
And then the guy takes the gun away from him.
They have a little intervention.
And at some point he ends up at a terrible therapist, and he talks about... It's not... He says... I think he said he's not depressed. And he says he doesn't... I can't remember exactly, but he says that he finds death abhorrent or something like that.
Oh, I thought that was the most interesting, like, moment in the movie because... Well, it wasn't the most interesting. That's not entirely true. But I mean, I just thought it was really interesting because... I mean, I think that we can all probably agree that he definitely had depression, but it wasn't because he didn't want to live. It was because the world that he saw around him was forcing him to try to be someone he wasn't. And it was a world that, like, the values of which he couldn't accept, which is why he couldn't stand to live in it anymore. And
I think it's really interesting how Bresson doesn't come down particularly on either side of that. You're just sort of left to sit with it without any of the normal, like, I'm trying to think, like, Good Will Hunting. Superficially a similar movie, right? Like a guy who's depressed, can't seem to do anything, goes to a psychologist. Then they become very, very different movies, obviously, but...
right, and the structure is a little bit different there.
But the structure there is...
Good Will Hunting?
Yeah, Good Will Hunting, right? Like, he's, like, pissed off, and he's working as a janitor, even though he's a super genius, and then they take him to go see Robin Williams, and then suddenly he can, like, take the job that he was supposed to have as a super genius.
Well, that had nothing to do with therapy. That had to do with Robin Williams. Great man.
Yeah.
Well, but Robin Williams plays the therapist in the movie, and you have this sort of sense of, okay, this is how we're supposed to feel about this man's predicament. This is how we're supposed to feel about this man's choices. When someone makes a self-destructive choice, we are not supposed to linger on it. We are supposed to be reaffirmed in our value system that the person is doing the wrong thing and or is going to suffer for doing the wrong thing. And that's not really here in this movie, right? Like, he's not really glamorizing anything in the suicide, but at the same time, you're not really left feeling like it's not patronizing him as a character. It's just sort of following him around, and I think that neutrality and sort of even distance throughout the film is what makes it so uncomfortable compared to comparable movies about things like suicide or...
Right, because it also...
the political situation, yeah.
It wasn't trying too hard to empathize with him either, because, like, at the end of the day, like... even though, like, his feelings were, like, completely valid, and, just the anger and isolation that, like, one feels in a society that's just, deeply unethical, like, that's totally real. At the same time, he was acting in ways that were, like, totally selfish and self-absorbed, Like, and so were all the characters. They were all kind of doing things in this way where it's like, like, I'm unhappy, so I'm gonna do things to the people around me that's gonna hurt them because I'm unhappy and I'm not dealing with my issues effectively.
Yeah, thank God that only ever happens in the movies.
Right.
Okay, so then he's at the therapist, and the therapist says, okay, you need more therapy, so come back in a couple of days, come back on Thursday at the same time. And while he was at it, he also said something about how the way the Romans committed suicide is they had a friend or a servant do it for them.
Right.
Right. So, of course, he just told him, and here's how you should kill yourself.
Right.
Right.
And he goes and he gets his friend, who's the junkie friend, and he says, look, I'll pay you to do something the way the Romans did it. And it's like, what? So I'll tell you later. And then they go, and it's, very quiet. Then we have the least dialogue in the entire movie, in which you see them on the subway, and then they're walking down the subway platform, which is at the, I forget what the station is called, but it's is it Avenue de l'Invalide or something? But
right.
So you see Invalids is a big sign that they're walking towards, and it's like, that was the only point in which the movie was sort of there was actual symbolism, but it wasn't even symbolism, it was so on point.
It was like wink wink, nudge nudge.
Wink wink, he's actually sick. And then they go up, and he tells them.
Well, but they walk through the invalid sign, but it's a subway. Everyone's walking through the invalid sign.
Yeah, but at that point, you only see the two of them.
You only see the two of them, but the implication is that everyone's an invalid.
Oh, okay.
I think.
So he's saying that that not
kind
just
of depends. I think both.
I don't know. Yeah.
But it is pointing out that he is.
It's on the nose. It's way more on the nose than any of the rest of the movie, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that Bresson just wanted to put that in as a joke.
Oh, that's true.
I think he was just
he's trolling us.
LOL, guys.
Yeah.
Get it?
Well,
that's him. That's him trolling us on Twitter.
Right.
Yeah, so anyway, so we'll finish the...
Oh, yeah, so he gives the guy the gun, and he says, so it makes it pretty clear what he wants to do, and I forget exactly what it says, but the guy ends up shooting him in the back while he's talking. Mm-hmm. So it's not clear that he even did it when he wanted to, right?
Right.
That the guy shot him too early. Oh, but he says, I'll pay you, and then the guy goes and he puts the gun in Charles's hand, takes the money out of Charles's pocket, which is a little unsettling, I think.
Mm. Yeah, it was very unsettling.
Yeah, and then he leaves, and is that it?
He just runs off into the night.
Yeah, fade to black.
Isn't that like a story? Someone getting shot in the back? Wasn't that like a Roman or Greek? Or am I just making that up?
I don't know. There were a lot of lost Roman and Greek stories, so it could have been.
But stabbing in the back doesn't sound right. Like, wouldn't you like stab them in their stomach? It wasn't always like stabbing in the stomach or in the front. I don't know.
Yeah, stabbing in the back was never considered to be proper in any society I can think of.
Right.
I think that he probably couldn't stand to look at him in the face. Yeah. But it's also like kind of a greater statement of the sort of complete sense of apathy that seemed to dominate like all of these kids. Like,
well, I think the reason why Charles could relate to the junkie guy, because like Charles knew that he couldn't trust the guy, knew that he couldn't. He basically just saw him as a more honest manifestation of the larger society, and in a weird way, his like impulse. Using the junkies like raw complacency and servility, I guess, for lack of a better word, to kind of, he's getting agency from the fact that he's using the society's complacency towards his own ends. At the same time, you're playing out this like very symbolic performance of him literally getting shot in the back by this like the most extreme simplified version of the society's complacency and addiction problems, like you were talking about, where just sort of nobody has the emotional wherewithal to deal with things themselves, and they're just sort of going around sort of whacking each other.
Right.
And being miserable.
They can't even face the reality of things, and so it's more comfortable to just perpetuate these like sort of universally accepted lies. Sounds about right.
And I think within like Bresson's filmography too, that's a very interesting reversal that he has to like that Charles has to make this sort of leap of faith with this random junkie that he doesn't know very well. I don't think many of the people in the movie know very well at all.
Well, I was going to say, they know him well enough that when they see... what's his name? The junkie has a name. He's not just the junkie.
Yeah. I feel like we didn't really spend as much time with him as we did with the others.
No, we spent the least time with him. But Charles sees him. The guy steals an apple, and Charles sees him and running off, and he says to one of the women, I don't remember if it's Vigo, Albert, or was there another woman? They all look the same to me. Most of these people look the same to me except for Charles. But he says, he's using again.
Let's go catch him.
Let's go catch him, and then next we see them in somebody's apartment. I don't know whose apartment it is, but he's sitting at the table, they're feeding him, and you see the apple that he stole on the table, and meanwhile the woman brings in a bowl full of fruit, because...
Yeah, right. Oh my god, that's so good.
So, it's helping him and also being completely oblivious to what's going on. I don't know what to make of that. I just like that image.
Well, and so the most famous Bresson movie, the one that you're going to see in like if you look up on Google like top 50 international movies they should watch, the one Bresson movie that's going to show up on all of them is called A Man Escaped, and that we should watch that. That's a great movie. But basically at the end.
We just spoiled that movie for you, so you don't have to watch it, and we haven't.
It's not giving away very much. Bresson is one of those people where like you guys knew the movie, you knew the ending of the movie at the very beginning of the movie, and when the disc was scratched with 2 minutes left to go in the movie, you guys were like, "I need to see it. I need to finish it."
Frustrating. Well, it's also just the fact that
it can't be spoiled, right?
Well, no, but it's not.
No, we know exactly what's
not even that. It's not even that. I just wanted to see how it happened because the movie was like one of the most visually beautiful movies I've ever seen. Like, I mean, and that's like, and I'm saying that, and like the dominant tones in this film were like earth and like slate gray. I mean, it's like an abysmal film if you're thinking like color wise. I mean, it's really just like it's dark and just drab, but I mean every shot is just so carefully, beautifully laid out. I mean, there's like these angles and there's a lot of shots of like the street and floors from like a slight angle above, so there's just I needed to see it.
I think that gets the heart too of the fact that he's judging people by their actions as opposed to their feelings. And I think a lot of that comes through, and I think that's another part of what makes the movie so like weird and kind of alienating and hard to follow at first.
That's why I feel like
because like you're watching pictures of people's hands and feet doing things. When they're speaking, he doesn't really care about like, oh, is it sad? We're not following the human drama. We're watching what people do and the consequences and outcomes of what they did.
Right. Like, one of the only moments of, like, caring, for lack of a better, like, someone showing that they're, like, conscious of the other is a sort of isolated shot through a doorway of a hand taking a bag from another hand and then continuing down the stairway.
And that's a classic. So there's very famous, I could show you guys this once we're done with the podcast because it's pretty short, but it's like 5 or 6 minutes long. I think it's one tracking shot at the beginning of Pickpocket, and it's literally just a stolen wallet shifting hands for like 6 minutes through a subway station. Right. And it's just gorgeous. And same thing with The Man Escaped. It opens with shots of the guy's hands in a car. He's like going for the door. But to go back to the Man Escaped point, the end of Man Escaped is this guy slowly trying to break out of a Nazi prison camp, right? Mm-hmm. And at the very end, he's faced with this choice of this younger POW shows up, and he basically has to trust this guy or kill him. And when he's making this escape that he's like been planning for months and months and months on end, and he makes this sort of like very quick, very kind of shallow alliance with this other person to escape from the prison camp into the greater world, and then we're kind of left with the ambiguity of running around in the woods at the end of the movie. And so at the end of The Devil Probably, you can kind of see where it's the inverse of that, which would have had a lot of weight for Bresson personally, I think, because Man Escaped was the film that...
Wait, what do you mean it's the inverse?
So you have the end of this movie is a person makes a kind of pact out of blind faith in order to kill himself, and you have this display of the kind of complicity of the society and everything awful, and this just disturbing image of two people agreeing to do something that doesn't really help either of them, which is the exact opposite of the end of Man Escaped, which is especially interesting because of Bresson's personal background.
Oh.
So he was raised in the Jansenist subset of Catholicism, which do you know anything about Jansenists?
I don't.
I can't say that I remember off the top of my head.
So you knew at some point?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, okay. So you can't remember if you forgot.
I'm not an expert, but the main thing that's kind of fascinating about them is that they're determinists.
Is that their way?
They're determinists, so they don't believe in free will. They don't believe in. They're like yay close to Calvin, and so the use of the visual symbol of the hands in Bresson's films is fascinating because so much of what goes on in the films is simultaneously, it seems like a lot of the tension and the sort of like weird beauty of it comes out of the fact that everything seems so inevitable. Uh-huh. You're just sort of seeing a thing unfold. On the other hand, every shot we're looking at is a reminder of human action and agency.
Oh, I see. Okay, but we know from the beginning exactly where it's going to end up. We know what fate has in store for him.
In this show,
this whole movie is just gonna...
This is the third or fourth movie he'd made that worked on it. Like, there's a Gentle Woman, Une Femme Douce, which follows almost the exact same structure as this. So he's a little bit like Ozu like that, but A Gentle Woman is basically the same kind of deal. It's a little less bleak, but we follow this woman. She kills herself at the end of the movie.
Okay.
It's still like having agency. I don't know.
Right. Well, I think that the tension between agency and the belief in the lack of agency, and also the disappointment in how the agency is used in the overall kind of landscape of human interaction and behavior, is like the nexus of what, at least to me, what makes his work so
right.
Interesting.
I guess it's the idea that in order to feel like you have any agency over your life, that's the only way to do it. You know, like, considering the sort of worldview of, like, I'd have to become someone completely other than what I want to be
right.
in order to succeed in a conventional fashion in the world.
So, I barely understood what was going on throughout the movie. Like I said, I understood, like, say, the couplets or the brief, a few lines of conversation together, but very little of what was going on. Or how it all tied together, and somebody was engaged to someone, or somebody was sleeping with somebody else, and that they were in a relationship with, I don't know what. But was there anything there that seemed like, okay, and that's why he killed himself? Or was it even like, oh, he was depressed, or it was his worldview, or like, nope, it was just going to happen that he was going to orchestrate his suicide? Like, did anything drive the suicide?
I mean, I think that's a lot of what... I think that comes back to the free will...
Yeah. What led to it other than
thing?
It was going to happen? It was determined that it was going to happen because we were told so at the beginning of the movie.
Well,
and here's 6 months in which... Does it matter what happened other than, nope, he's going to kill himself?
And it's also interesting because you could see this as an answer film to a lot of other European movies about suicides that came out around that time. There's In a Year of 7 Moons or In a Year of 13 Moons, In a Year of 13 Moons by Rainer Werner Fassbinder, the famous gay German director, which is basically just about this, like, drag queen walking around before killing themselves. Which also features 5 minutes of the Jerry Lewis movie You're Never Too Young towards the end.
Are you serious?
Fun fact, yeah.
Wow.
Maybe we should do that one for the next time we get you on the podcast. We'll just make that our thing.
What, am I just going to be like the one who watches the suicide movie? Great. Awesome.
Oh, but we're going to do that as a double feature? So we watched the Jerry Lewis movie, and then we watched the Fassbinder movie.
Yeah, we could. Well, so the Jerry Lewis movie that like he uses a clip of in the movie. And I mean, Fassbinder. You ever seen any Fassbinder movies?
Yes, I have. And could you remind me?
Marriage of Maria Brown.
Thank you. Yes,
Ali Fear Eats the Soul.
No, Marriage of Maria Brown.
Yeah, Marriage of Maria Brown.
Which I always remembered as the Marriage of Ava Brown. Different.
Oh, yeah, she burns the fucking house down at the end, and you're just watching the credits as like this house is burning down. I love that so much.
I thought Maria Brown died in a murder suicide with Hitler. Sorry,
but
well, okay. I feel like it made sense that he did. I mean, not only because there were multiple other attempts in the movie, including him kind of trying to drown himself in a bathtub, and then he got rudely interrupted by the girl he was sleeping with. That was a weird scene. But I don't know, I mean, I feel like his whole demeanor throughout the movie was just kind of like, the only thing I care about is, like, like, ravaging, like, women. Like, I mean, it was just, he was so just apathetic on this, like, profound level that, like, nothing really seemed to like, matter to him aside from this sort of, like, hedonism, like...
Well, and hedonism is usually a response to the lack of sensation.
Right. It was the only time that he felt alive is when he was having sex, and he couldn't even answer...
If he did.
He couldn't even answer the question, like, did the other person enjoy it?
You see, in one of the scenes, you see, all right, it's one of the women, it's a little dark, but it's one of the women is facing down towards the bed, but she's raised a little bit, and she's sobbing, and there's somebody, you just see his chest next to her, they're he's under a blanket, and every so often he'll tap her back, like, there, and then take the hand away, and she's sobbing, and then again it's like tap, like a there, there. Like, no real embrace, no ask, what's wrong, or what can I, just tap, tap, tap. And then we see it's him. I forget what happens, like, in which his head pops up. But, it's just sort of very apathetic. Like, this person there is expressing, like, some emotion. Somebody needs there some comfort, some empathy. And he's like, tap, tap, tap.
Right. He couldn't even... And I mean, I think it might have been, was it, what was her name? Albert? I think she was kind of like his foil in a certain way, I guess. Like, I don't know. I felt like out of all of them, she was the other one in the movie who was acting on these, like, purely sort of self-centered, impulses that were kind of coming from this place of, like, I don't know if I want to say apathy, but she was, like, deeply depressed, but she wasn't, like, she wasn't doing anything, like, productive to try to get herself out of it, so she was just kind of lashing out at people around her. Like, she kind of alienated herself from this man that she had this committed relationship with in order to go and, like, be with the depressed guy. But then she didn't end up, like, acting well with him either, so they kind of reminded me of each other in that sense. Like, I think she might have been the one who was crying.
Was she? Okay.
But I don't know.
Yeah, and I think this kind of, like, fits really nicely within the like, disappointments of the left genre. Like, there were a lot of movies kind of looking back on why did the 60s counterculture movement flare so brightly and then basically collapse in on itself so quickly. Like, The Big Chill could be almost seen as like, sort of in that vein. Return of the Secaucus 7 for sure. I'm trying to think, there's some other, like, a lot of Gen X cinema is just sort of like, oh, you people call yourself hippies, but then you're just sort of, it turned out you were a bunch of pieces of shit. Like, that's like the Gen X baby boomer feud, right?
And then the questions kind of raised, like, how much of that is, like, actually really wanting to fight for the cause, and how much of that is just kind of stemming from this place of, like, I'm not happy with anything.
There was a line in the movie
to begin with.
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, go for it.
Oh no, just that there was a line in the movie. It's too late for a revolution, or something like that.
Right. So, yeah, like, how much do you actually want to change something, or are you just looking for something to complain about?
And this is France, where how many revolutions took place? Like, the French Revolutions wasn't the only one. Then there was the the barricades that we see in Les Miserables. Right?
And that brings up another whole interesting dimension to it, which was that Bresson was a massive, massive influence on all the Cahiers du Cinema guys who kind of established the French Nouvelle Vague, known as the New Wave. But he was a good 20 years older than all of them. So he made his, he made his formative films at a much earlier period than, say, Godard, Truffaut, or even Jean-Pierre Melville did. And most of those French New Wave guys, like Godard, absolutely, according to Godard, Robert Bresson is probably the greatest filmmaker that ever lived. I don't want to speak for John Jost, but, like, John would probably put him in, like, his top 3.
John Jost keeps coming up, but isn't he just, like, some guy that you know?
Oh, he's
in the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die book.
Oh, he is? Okay, I thought
he's had a full retrospective.
Dude.
He's, like, lived out of a car, but had a full career retrospective at the MoMA. And he won the first ever, so, the Independent Spirit Awards.
We should do a John movie.
Yeah, so the independent... Yeah, I have a lot of John movies laid right there.
But you know John.
Yeah, no, I worked... So the Plain Songs, that movie, that was a sequel to one of John's movies.
Oh, that guy!
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So Bresson is in this position where most of the French New Wave guys who weren't Truffaut... So let's say Godard went further to the radical left than the rest of them. Godard attempted to form the Kino I movement in the late 60s, which were hardcore, far-left, Maoist documentary filmmakers. It was supposed to be kind of a more radical answer to newsreel in the United States. But then
5 years later...
And then 5 years later, he made that movie where he was bitching about Jane Fonda. Yeah, I have that over there at Tout Va Bien. Well, no, that wasn't the one. No, that's the one where Jane Fonda's in it, and then the one called Letter to Jane is just 40 minutes of, like, Jean-Luc Godard and his friend bitching about this picture of Jane Fonda.
No kidding.
Yeah. Which is... which Mark Rappaport once called one of the most dehumanizing pieces of cinema ever created.
Oh, God.
Mark Rappaport's your other buddy, right?
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, he's a...
Was that the guy that gave you the $25?
Got friends
no, that was Jonathan Rosenbaum.
Oh, okay.
And Jonathan Rosenbaum gave... When I met with him and I said, like, hey, you know, like, you want to find out what happened to you, $25? I'm driving through Chicago this afternoon.
Right. You talked about that last time.
So
wait, so who's Mark Rappaport? Because I'm not Rappaport.
Oh, okay, so it's all right. That's another movie. So Mark Rappaport, he's an independent filmmaker. The films that he's known for are not the ones that I'm necessarily the most excited by. I mean, they're good, but so you got like the first 5 narrative movies, which are all kind of like if you mix Charlie Kaufman with Robert Bresson. We should do a Mark Rappaport movie. So I only showed you the one, right?
Oui.
Casual Relations.
Yes, Casual Relations.
Or no, I showed you 2. I showed you Casual Relations and I showed you The Scenic Route.
Wait, I might have seen...
I can't remember. I remember Casual, because that was the one with the threesome.
No.
That
was The Scenic Route.
That was The Scenic Route?
Casual Relations is the one with, like, where it's just a bunch of weird short films basically spliced together. It starts out with the person not wanting to get out of bed, and then you have all the, like, cuts to the picture from Nosferatu.
Huh. Yes!
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, she's in the room. And
yeah,
it's
and
all
just
very
the guy...
isolating.
Wait, what's the Scenic Route?
So Scenic Route is another...
I love that one.
So Mark Rappaport,
that was
he
my
made
college
really?
5 or 6, I believe 5 fictional feature-length films, which my personal favorite of those is Local Color, which neither of you have seen, so next time we do the podcast, maybe we'll do that one.
I've seen Local Hero.
Very different movie.
Very different movie?
Very
okay,
different movie.
All right. I'm just sharing movies that I've seen. I also saw one other Transformers movie. I can't remember which one, though.
I think I saw the animated one with the Weird Al song in it. Dare to be stupid, when they go to the trash compactor planet. Anyway, so Mark Rappaport, the thing he's known for is Rock Hudson's Home Movies, which is a movie that...
Rock Hudson.
Yeah, so he hires an actor who looks basically nothing like Rock Hudson to play Rock Hudson from Beyond the Grave. And using the best video... like supercutting technology that 1992 had to offer. He goes through every clip in every Rock Hudson movie practically that would suggest that Rock Hudson was in fact desperately trying to tell all of America just how gay he was. And exactly how and in what fashion he was gay.
But why would a straight guy like Rock Hudson do that?
I don't know, but it makes for an interesting science fiction what if, right? But no, yeah, Rock Hudson's Home Movie. We should do that one. That's only an hour, and that's like a great movie. But anyway, so Mark Rappaport, his like supercut kind of movies, like that one in the celluloid, or not the celluloid closet, the Lavender Hill Mom?
Screen.
Oh. No, not the Lavender Hill Mom.
Because that was last week.
Something like that.
Once again, I'm sharing movies that I've seen that have similar names.
But the fictional ones, it's like imagine, like Robert Bresson meets Being John Malkovich. Like
that
crazy,
sounds like a movie
ridiculous.
I want to see.
Well, that's how I would describe The Scenic Route to somebody, honestly. Like, the plot's constantly shifting in weird ways, but you have this understated, non-realistic tone to the performance and presentation that resembles Bresson. For me, at least, insofar as Mark does not like titillating people at all.
That sounds dirty,
right? It sounds like even when I say that he doesn't want it.
It's a pretty dirty sounding word.
Yeah. Mark Rappaport doesn't like titillating people.
He does not like titillating people. Or at least that's the sense I get from the...
He really abhors nuptials.
But anyway, so Robert Bresson...
How's it my turn to make all the vulgar jokes? And I guess because I don't know anything about these movies. What was that?
Who usually does it?
Well, she feeds me beer, so then like I get very serious and focused with beer.
You do?
Okay.
No, you don't. That is the biggest load of you know what I've ever heard.
And I'm slap happy for some reason. So.
Anyway, so Godard decides that he's a hardcore Marxist, Maoist. Even Truffaut, like when they shut down...
Decides, yeah.
When they shut down Paris in 1968, because we all know that they shut down Paris and took over the city, Godard, Truffaut, and a couple of the other major directors from the French New Wave were some of the first public figures to speak up as representatives of the taken over Paris.
Wait, who took over the city?
Protesters. They took over the entire city of Paris.
That's like what we should do today.
Take over Paris?
We should just take over America.
All right.
And so I think...
It's too late for a revolution, though. That's the message I got from this movie.
Well, I think this movie was in part Bresson responding to that, because Bresson probably had a very weird... Because all of these guys that would have been speaking for this thing, Bresson was considered amongst, like, domestically amongst other French filmmakers, like the big names... I mean, the closest thing I can think of is, like, the reputation that Orson Welles has in the United States. Like, he is the gold standard of how you make a movie to these people. And so they're all kind of chasing him around with puppy dog eyes. Like, Godard offered to make his movie trailers for free, and there's some very weird trailers for some of these movies that were cut together by Godard. There's a Godard chick razor advertisement that's, like, really strange, but yeah, and I feel like part of this movie and part of the kind of cynicism about the prospects of the left, and maybe not cynicism, but bleak picture of the youth culture. I feel like if Bresson was having any direct interactions with the youth culture or the hippie culture, because I mean he's like 75 years old when he's directing this fucking movie. Most of the stuff has to be like kind of mirror or like funhouse mirror portraits of Godard and his associates.
So he's roughly 65 when he's like 65 when they take over Paris.
Yeah,
in 68.
Yeah, and in the French New Wave guys, I think Godard would have been like 45 at that point because he was a little older than the other guys. But Truffaut would have been like my age, a little older.
Okay. Oh wow. So wait, is this considered French New Wave? What is this considered? Oh, this isn't. Okay, all right.
No, so Bresson's earliest films, the first film is in 1931. It's called L'Ange du Pêche. It was considered lost until 3-4 years ago. It looks nothing like this movie, and he hadn't quite figured out his style yet. The second one, which I have over there, is called Les Dames de Babylone.
The Women of Babylon?
It's a part of France called the Dubois de Boulogne or something like that. Still doesn't look anything like this movie. Then everything else basically looks like variations on this movie. He's a lot like Ozu in that he kind of figured out, this is what I want to do. And he even wrote a book of like little kind of Zen koans on how he would direct movies. And that's why I ran off to the bookshelf a couple minutes ago, because I have it over there. But one of the most interesting books I ever read on movies.
I thought you mentioned Ozu earlier, and I thought you were talking about the camera shots, because there's a lot of times where it seems like you just plop the camera down, let stuff happen. I mean, there were more tracking shots.
Oh yeah.
But a lot of times it was just boom, it's here. There's some stuff out of the camera that you'd normally imagine would be on camera.
It's elliptical.
That would follow. Yeah, like the scene that I mentioned in which the woman is crying in the bed, and the guy kind of taps her every so often. You don't see his face. You don't know who it is. And eventually, like, Charles comes into I can't remember if the camera moves or if he moves his head and you see that it's him. But before that, it's like, it's just a chest and an arm.
Right.
Yeah, I think that like gets at another great kind of weird contradictory simultaneity in these movies. Yeah, like you have this sense of the immediacy of the stakes of the situation. At the same time, you get the sense that the director has this very very deeply ingrained sense that, as Bill Hicks would put it, life is just a ride. Like, he's not holding existence very tightly, right?
I'm sorry.
Well, no, like you got some movies, like any sports movie, they're holding existence very tightly. Everything's about proving yourself, and like there's an invisible clock somewhere, and you gotta prove you're not a piece of shit to everybody, and blah blah blah. And there's meaning to everything, and there's a clear narrative. And the director's kind of coming at it they'll get very close to the material. They'll like deal with the material very directly because they don't see any ambiguity. Like they're kind of hugging it like this, and
Speaking of sports movies, just an aside, I forgot.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to
show you. Yeah.
I wanted to show you the scene from Lagan.
Well, you can put it on here. The Wi-Fi code on this thing works.
Oh, that's true. We could pause this. You could watch it and come back. I mean, it's a total interruption what we're talking about. So Okay. We can watch it when we're done with this and then do the follow-up. So, anyways, okay, we'll get back to that. So... Remember, I don't know why. I already showed it to my friends once today because I watched a movie with them earlier. So now I just love that scene. So, anyways, back to the main feature.
Oh, okay.
And embracing and I don't remember what the rest.
Well, no, because like Ozu, right? He's the thing that's so incredible about Ozu is that we get the full sense of the tragedy of time passing and people drifting without the sense of him. He just lets them sit as their own thing, right? Like he's there's no bluffing, kind of like Bresson. If there is an emotional impact to the material, he's not sugarcoating it at all, and it lives and dies on the strength of the material.
Okay. Elizabeth, I don't think anybody out there saw you pointing at Dan, saying you agreed with him. I think that's what it meant.
Oh, I just I love that the tragedy of time passing and people drifting. That's
well, then we should watch an Ozu movie.
I think about a lot, and have written like multiple lyrics about that. So just
the best movie about that is really, called Late Spring.
It's like an emotional topic.
Although there's also Tokyo Story, and there's Make Way for Tomorrow, and there's a lot of movies about like people forgetting old people and us feeling bad about it.
Yeah, man, that scene from Tokyo Story. We talked about it before. Anyways, that's sorry.
The highway median,
the highway median where the elderly parents are sitting in the middle of a highway median having a picnic or just sitting there eating their sandwiches.
Yeah, maybe next time we should
do an Ozu movie. And it's so sad and
makes
beautiful.
me really want a sandwich.
Sandwich.
That's the lesson.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, how much cheese have we eaten today?
Not enough. And you know why? Because you can never have enough cheese.
That's true.
You might as well have some cheese.
The only time recently where I felt that way was when I was in Florida because I was stuck eating all foods that were out as opposed to cooking my own food at home. And when I cook at home, I tend to eat healthier. And when I eat out, I tend to eat less healthy things. So by the time I finally got back from Florida, I was like, I need vegetables.
Yeah. I know, I was going around the house and thinking, like, I want to have this and I want to have that. It's like, what I really want is some fresh fruit. All right, I'll have water. So, like, all right, I'll have some more, something healthy, and I'll have some eggs, or I'll have one of those low-fat cheese. But I really want some fruit. I need something
Dude,
nutritious that's, like, wet. And a little sweet.
Something that's nutritious and
wet. You hear that, guys? He's single.
Well, I got a whole bunch.
Oh, so Ron apparently already has something that's nutritious and wet. Disregard my prior statement.
That you can do so much with. I've got
grapes. Do so much with.
I didn't know that was like a nutritious thing.
Some people like grapes, and some people like watermelon. And some people like grapes and watermelon. And I have both. So anyways, I'm sorry, that was a really obtuse reference to the recovered scene.
Was that a metaphor for something?
It was. Yeah, it's a really obtuse reference that only I obviously can understand.
Because I can kind of guess what grapes are, but like I'm not sure what part of the body a watermelon. Liz just slapped her watermelon.
What I was referring to was the scene from Spartacus, that originally was cut out. But what is some people like clams and some people like mussels? I forget what it was, and some people like snails. Some people like snails, and some people like clams.
Some people like Kirk Douglas,
and some people like Tony Curtis, and some people like both.
Bananas.
Some people like bananas, and some people like kumquats.
We also have grapes.
Grapes.
And we have a mandarin.
Ooh. Okay, grapes, mandarin, and grilled cheese. That sounds beautiful.
I'm all in one sandwich.
I guess we already had some crackers and cheese. And,
I did put out grapes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Podvisitor from another planet.
It was so beautiful when I came here, and there was a whole. There was guacamole. There were crackers. There was cheese. There were what are these again? These chips.
Sweet potato tortilla chips.
Sweet potato tortilla chips and some grapes. Oh man, it was wonderful.
Yeah, it was
I like being able to like play the host every so often.
Yeah. No, you had a whole spread.
I also just I was like, I need to use these freaking avocados. Like, avocados, they don't mess around, like when they're ready, like you have to act. They will not wait for you. Yeah. And they also won't give you any warning. Like they go from being completely unripe to ripe within a matter of hours.
That's what she said.
Yeah, and like whenever I see a nice spread like that, I just remember
more like minutes or like seconds, but not hours.
I remember when they took me up in the spaceship.
Wait, I'm not even sure what the metaphor was. I just threw that out there. I didn't think it meant anything. I just wanted to throw in that's what she said.
Well, no, but so they take me up into the spaceship, and there's this bright light, and they say, bachelorhood, not really suiting you, kid. And then there was this thing that looked like the inside of one of those Kinder, like German chocolate eggs with the toy inside. Yeah, with the toy inside, and it was
so nasty.
But the chocolate's so nasty, and the toys are cheap and crappy.
Yeah.
But the novelty's there.
Yes. I've gotten them several times just because, like, ooh, I wonder this time what it'll be like. Oh, it sucks just as much as last time, maybe worse.
And so the alien life forms, they're like, we're not impressed with your bachelor lifestyle, and they give me this thing that looks like a giant Kinder egg, and there's this bright flash of light, and this thing comes walking out of it, and it was the Podvisitor, and they said, like, there's going to be guacamole from now on, and today it came true, so thank you, aliens.
4 years later, there's guacamole.
Secondary thank you to Elizabeth for, like, going along with the aliens. Mostly thanks to the aliens.
They must have brainwashed me, because I don't remember this part of my life where I was living with aliens.
Well, you're the Podvisitor.
From another planet.
Well, they were keeping you in cold storage for when they needed you.
I mean, I have to say, your cooking has improved a lot since we've been together. I mean, I still remember vividly the first meal you ever made me, and it was, like, unspeakably awful.
Well, that was before I had direct access to the alien technology.
Now you cook well. I see.
Yeah, I mean, like...
I came encrypted with, like, alien recipes.
Well, remember that time you got a nosebleed and it was green, right? Like, that was kind of weird. Like, it was all green. It looked kind of like on Nickelodeon in the 90s, like that stuff they used to spray on the kids' heads. I thought that was... And then I figured out that you came from space, and then I was like, okay, this was meant to be.
What was it that you had to say in order to get slime? Wasn't
it there was a secret password every time? It was kind of like Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Yeah. But it was always the same word.
Oh, it was always the same.
Yeah.
Gack. Well, I think Gack was what they called... Or no, they just called it slime.
I'm going to look that up while you talk about... I don't know.
Okay.
We talk about snot or...
Ew.
So yeah, Bresson, I think the...
I didn't say talk about Bresson. I'm sorry, talk about anything but Bresson.
No,
sorry. I guess this is back to the movie. Yeah.
Alright. No, I think that's something that's interesting about his movies versus a lot of other people's movies is... this inherent distrust of human emotion. Like there's kind of a sense that getting the emotional content of things is not going to get you any closer to the truth of the situation, and in fact trying to methodically strip away layers of that will get you closer to, I don't want to say the truth necessarily, but I guess the essential question at the center of the scenario or image.
I feel like that's an interesting point, because I don't necessarily think that that's possible. Like, at the end of the day, like the decision to commit suicide is a deeply emotional one.
Right, I'm saying the presentation of the film. The presentation of the film is presenting us with a very emotional situation with no emotions. We're kind of seeing a very emotional situation from the perspective of just people going around doing things very casually. So that we're almost hit with the gravity of the situation more because we're waiting for this emotional money shot that never shows up.
I don't don't know about that. I mean, I don't know if we're necessarily hit with the gravity of the situation more. I actually would almost argue the opposite, that we're sort of forced to be detached from it. That it's just aesthetic, you know? I mean...
I guess for me, it kind of like, it pushes it more into... It underlines... The only thing that it does underline is how unsolvable the kind of inherent question of the situation is, usually, right? Like, you're like, oh, okay, I'm not engaging with this on an emotional level, and then you engage with it on an intellectual level, and you find, like, oh, this is more disturbing when I'm not...
I don't really trust the differentiation between those two things very much. I mean, I don't know.
I think you both provide some very good insight and a really deep analysis of this movie. Do you want to hear my take on it?
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of liked it.
There.
I'm sorry. That wasn't meant to undermine anything that you said. This was
no.
Just to show how well I can speak.
He's a...
No, or just like...
It's a difficult... For your first Bresson movie, this is like the most difficult movie the guy ever made, I think, except the Lancelot movie.
You're being far too nice to me. This is...
Well,
my more insightful analysis would have been something like, well, I like parts of it, but not other parts of it. There we go. Okay, there's my deep analysis.
Yeah, what parts did you like? What parts didn't you like?
I really liked the scene with the apple. Oh, wait, I was going to say something. I realized afterwards something else about this, and this, I think, has to do with maybe saying something about the movie. Maybe I already said it. Remind me. But, okay, so they get the junkie who steals the apple, and then they go and they say, okay, we need to help. Charles says we need to help him, which actually Charles says we need to help him, which is extremely unusual. But then you see them at the apartment, and
he's
they're
the only
feeding
one
him.
He actually cares about.
Yeah, you're right. And he's the only one that matters. He's the one that helps him die. Yeah, wow.
And also stealing an apple has no biblical...
None at all.
Significance whatsoever.
None at all. But so he steals the apple, and so they say, he says, we need to help him. So he and the woman go to his place, and they're sitting at the table, and the guy is eating, and he has the apple in front of him. And what does the woman do? She brings over the one thing he doesn't need, a bowl of fruit. Because he already has the apple right in front of him. It's what he stole. It's actually why he's there. And she just brings him something that he absolutely does not need at that point. So, anyways, I don't know what that says. Yeah. I can't remember. I know I talked about that scene before, but it was the fact that it was something that he didn't need.
Well, the tone deafness, right? Like he's disconnected from the people around him in the sense that they don't really, they're not speaking the same language. He's almost acting as if he was in a different world from them. Like their actions don't. Like what's his face? The guy with the unibrow kind of understands, like, oh, there's some kind of communication issue going on here, but everybody else is just sort of like, we're in our world, he's in his world.
So he's the only one who has any kind of empathy in the whole movie. He's the only one I didn't hate.
The guy with the unibrow?
Yeah, the guy who's the OG boyfriend.
So, all right. I know I said this. I had a really hard time distinguishing between them. I couldn't tell the difference between the two women. I had a hard time telling the difference between two of the other men that were there. The only one that I could distinguish was Charles. Did Charles have blonde hair?
No, he was kind of like a mousy brown.
Okay, a mousy brown. But all the others had really dark hair, either really dark brown or black.
The one woman, not Albert, but
Edwige?
Yes, she had really dark hair,
right?
And then Albert had more like a medium brown.
Oh, so they were a different color. Oh.
And then the other guy, I can't remember his name, but he had very dark hair.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And then Charles had that.
He had the lightest hair.
He had that light sort of that.
So compared to them, brown. I thought he was blonde, but he wasn't at all.
Did we watch the same movie? No.
Yeah. Well, no. I was having a hard time distinguishing between them, and now I was even remembering them as all having the same face, except for Charles.
Well, that's and well, I was talking about this earlier, but I think that's truly. I think a lot of that is the effect of watching a lot of people without an affect because a lot of our personality is expressed through our emotiveness, and when you take that away, you're just kind of left with these like clean slates.
You know, I wonder how much I was missing because of the subtitles. Because I was actually thinking, if this movie was in English, would have had an easier time. And I wasn't even thinking about the subtitles. It's just if this were in English, would have an easier time following what was going on, despite the lack of affect, despite the lack of any real inflection or anything like that. And now that I think about it, it's that and looking down at the subtitles and not being able to focus enough on the screen and the distinction. I didn't get a vocal distinction and not enough of a visual distinction because I was looking at the bottom reading. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know how to read subtitles. I do stuff, I read stuff with subtitles. I'll also put on stuff in English. I'll turn on the English subtitles if I have a hard time understanding, or if it's have a hard time understanding.
No, I definitely feel you. I mean, I think that the struggle with that is like, your eyes do end up spending less time on the people's faces. Yeah. Which is why I really need to brush up on my French.
Not just the faces, but the composition of the shots. It's like a lot. Like I feel it. Like with a foreign language movie, I haven't really seen it until I've seen it like enough times where I'm not looking at the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Which again, in this,
depending on what it is, obviously, like if it's L'Auberge Espagnol, you've seen it once, you've seen it. There's not a lot going on there. Andrei Rublev, I've probably seen it like 3-4 times, and I still couldn't tell you what was going on for like a lot of that movie.
So I just watched Tony Erdmann, which is like I finally saw it. I know I've talked about it here before, and I was wondering if when we talked about top 10 of the decade, or not top 10, but favorite 10 of the decade.
Did it make it?
Well, I watched it too late. I watched it in January of this year. So
but like if you could go back in time and do it, would it be top 10? It
might very well be in my favorite 10. It was because it made it a top 10 of the decade in so many different lists, including the Cahiers du Cinema, right?
Right.
Yeah. Of course, sort of Twin Peaks, which I still don't understand. I don't know if I could trust any list that considers the third season of Twin Peaks as a movie. But anyway, sorry, that's
I feel like the Cahiers du Cinema, like they
Oh, I love Twin Peaks.
Their top 10 list is always fascinating because it never looks like any of the other. Like you look through their top 10 lists in the 80s, and it's the only place where you're going to see Andrei Tarkovsky and Jerry Lewis popping up as like the Givens.
Wow, nice.
Like, they loved fucking 80s Jerry Lewis movies for whatever reason.
Because they're French, and the French love Jerry Lewis.
He was always more popular in the United States. If you look at like
he was very popular here.
Yeah, like Godard really liked him. The French New Wave directors really liked Jerry Lewis, but there's not really many indications that the French public ever gave a shit about Jerry Lewis.
Right. But what I was saying about Tony Erdmann is I definitely would have I would have considered it. I don't know if it would have actually made my top 10 favorite, but I definitely would have considered it. And I regret I've been waiting to see this movie since shortly after it came out, and my friend recommended it. Every so often I'll go to him and say, I don't like saying full names, but tell me what movies I should watch, and he'll give me some movies that I might not otherwise see, and they're great. In fact, one of them was one of the movies I did put in my my favorites was The Fits, which is the only short film and also the only film of starring people of color, I think. I had a lot. Most of my half my actors were people of color, but this was the only movie. The short. Anyways, sorry. Again, coming back, Tony Erdmann was one of the movies that he suggested, and I've been holding off seeing it for so long. It was like I'm waiting for the moment in which I want to see a 2-hour and 45-minute German film, all English subtitles. Not entirely true. And I don't want to say anything about what the movie was about. I don't want any spoilers. I really recommend seeing it. I'd be willing to see it again. I'd be happy to see it again. But I think what came out of it was there's so much silence in that movie, and there's so much space between in the middle of the dialogue and between people speaking that I wasn't looking down at the credit, not the credits, at the subtitles too much. I was able to spend a lot more time looking at what was going on. So sorry, that's just going back to the notion of not knowing, not like being too busy looking at the subtitles to.
Next time you come on the show, we should do Satan Tango.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Do you know why you've heard of it?
Why have I heard of it?
You know why you've heard of it? Because it's 7 hours long.
Oh, you told me about this. Yeah. Okay.
No, but it's great. Like, Stan saw it. Stan was like, this is the shit. My older sister saw it, and she was like, this is the shit. You need to see this.
Well, recently I saw it was the 5 or 7 hour Soviet version of War and Peace. And it was excellent.
God.
Yeah.
There was a break. But I saw it in the theater. I saw it at the Brattle.
Holy crap.
At one of the local
I don't think I could commit to anything for that long.
Yeah.
The 13-hour cut of Out One.
What's that?
So it's the longest film of the French New Wave for sure. There's no other, I can't think of a longer than 13-hour movie that came out of the French New Wave. But Jacques Rivette, the guy who did Paris Nous Apparent and L'Amour Fou. L'Amour Fou. I always get that confused with the guitar movie Parole Le Fou, but no, he did L'Amour Fou. It's like 13 hours long. They had a theatrical re-release of the complete cut of it a little while ago. Maybe Criterion put it out on a disc now, but it used to be one of those things where you just literally couldn't find it. Yeah, multiple disc for sure.
You have a five DVD set, all for one movie.
Well, there's a couple of, because like in Europe, you know, most of the film industry and the television industry, it's the same government grant agency. So you'll have like to go back to Fassbinder, there's a great like 12-hour long Fassbinder movie called Berlin Alexander Plots that was technically a TV miniseries. The thing is, when they get a prestigious director in Europe to direct a TV miniseries, they'll shoot it on film. Even if it's supposed to just go to TV, because 90% of the money you're going to make on the movie in those markets is going to be abroad. So if it's not on film or something in a relatively high definition, you can't export it. Oh, yeah. If it's not in a fairly high definition, you can't export it.
So I was just waving to Dan,
so
leaning back.
Like Ingmar Bergman scenes for a marriage.
I was thinking of that, yeah.
That's a perfect example of that. There's other examples.
Wait,
Maurice Pilat did an 8-hour miniseries that I've not been able to find.
But so Scenes from Marriage was made as a TV miniseries, right?
Yeah, it was a 6-hour TV miniseries. But immediately after it was done as a miniseries, somehow there's a 3-hour theatrical cut that's on film that has English subtitles.
So is actually Scenes from Marriage meant as one long movie or as 6? I don't know how many episodes it was. You said 6?
Yeah, so as somebody who's watched the 3-hour cut and watched the 6-hour cut, I think it was meant as a TV miniseries. Each of the individual episodes, the 6 individual episodes, is structured pretty much perfectly as like a 3-act play. Bergman's background is all in the theater.
It's not a 6-hour movie. It's
6 1-hour episodes that add up to a cumulative whole. And I would definitely, my recommended way to watch that movie is watch the 6-hour version, take 3-4 days, however long, 6 days, 1 episode a day. Don't rush it. The 3-hour movie is...
Don't bother? No.
Basically, yeah. Like the 3-hour movie is kind of like watching a really extended version of one of those like previously on things you get on an HBO show before. Last week, Scenes from a Marriage. They weren't married.
I realized I just said, it said don't bother watching an Ingmar Bergman film, which you can't say about an Ingmar Bergman film.
There's crappy Ingmar Bergman movies. You ever seen any of his like really early movies? Like pre-Seventh Seal, pre-Wild Story. Like some of them are good. Smiles of a Summer Night or whatever, that's like fun. But some of them are just bad. They're just bad, yeah.
Anything else to say about what's the movie
The Devil called? The Devil's Advocate with Keanu Reeves.
Yeah. Or what's...
No, The Devil Probably by Robert Bresson, 1978.
Yeah, that's the one. All right. Anything left to say?
No, I mean, I think if we do another Robert Bresson episode, there's plenty more to say about Robert Bresson, but this specific movie, I think we got across what was up.
Yeah.
I feel like we nailed it.
We nailed it.
All right. Well, so I'm going to say goodbye. Ron's going to say goodbye. Let's see if we can get Elizabeth on the line so she'll say goodbye.
All right, well, I'll just say one thing.
Farewell, mes amis.
So, until next week. Later, folks.
Wait. We didn't all say goodbye. Let's go through it again. Okay.
So, this has been Dan.
And this has been Ron.
And this is Elizabeth.
And this has been a nominee.
Questionable movies.
Yeah, very questionable.
Woo. Okay, take care, everyone.